while we're here outside finishing up these walls around the patio. It reminds me, brings me to mind, these boys are doing such a great job here, and I tell you what, they don't know how much I appreciate what they're doing. But here we're simply putting up walls that remind me of the walls of Jerusalem that Jeremiah, I said this before, that Nehemiah rebuilt. And I want to use this as an illustrative point to introduce to us in our Wednesday nights, which I may be converting to Thursday nights, our musings with the pastor as we talk about rebuilding of the walls by Nehemiah. Good afternoon, church family and friends. Pastor Sam on this Friday afternoon, presenting my Wednesday evening musings. I tell you, we've had out-of-town company this week and have been really quite busy and full, but I did want to get a message out to you just to let you know we're thinking of you and we love you, hadn't forgotten you, and we didn't get last Sunday's sermon message out, which we'll get that out as well. Maybe we'll send that to this coming Sunday. But we're right before Thanksgiving, and we're finishing up some projects here at our home, and one of the last things that we're doing is an outdoor patio. We have an outdoor chimney fireplace, and we put some walls up around it. And as I was watching the guys build those walls and I was contemplating the nature of walls, it put me to mind of Nehemiah and the rebuilding of the walls of Jerusalem after their destruction. And walls are interesting. And walls, typically we think of walls as devices to either keep things or people out or things or people in. And I thought about the walls of my patio, and I said, well, that runs contrary to our nature. We don't want to keep people out, and we don't want to keep ourselves in. We've actually devised a plan to be able to open up our patio and a fireplace to the community when we build a fire in there. And if there's smoke coming out of the chimney and the lights on in the garage, the entire community is welcome to come over and fellowship with us and with each other. And so in that light, it made me think about, well, why am I building walls? I'm not planning to keep anybody in, and I'm certainly not planning to keep anybody out. But we did build those walls in order to define the space. To define the space. Think about that for a minute. We ride by houses all the time that have fences around them, and they serve no real purpose other than perhaps to simply define the space. I think sometimes that's important, that we define the spaces in which we live. Now, there are lots of different ways to do that. We do that by our customs and our cultures. We do that by the rules and the regulations, the laws upon which we live, the laws of civility. Our Constitution, our Bill of Rights, and Declaration of Independence are such walls that we have that really invite people in and encourage people to move out. But they are walls that define who we are as a nation. Israel had such walls, and I think church today, we have such walls. We really tend to get caught up in the context of walls as barriers, either coming or going. But if we think about walls and the walls in our lives as elements of defining space that's important to us. We put up walls around a building and call it a church, but it's not really the church. It's just the walls that define the space of grace in which we gather in order to worship God. I would like to suggest to you, and I want you to think about these extraordinary times that we are experiencing and that we are trying to manage, and in the midst of all of our safe distancing and the protocols, perhaps, perhaps, perhaps they're infringing, perhaps they're deteriorating some of the walls that we have as Christians that define our space and our time as Christians. Most importantly, perhaps the Sabbath. Everyone recognizes the importance of safe distancing and not congregating in crowds, but if we think about it for a moment, this fear that we have and what's going on with the pandemic is eroding on the walls of our Sabbath, which as Christians is a defining of the space and the time of grace that we recognize as Christians when we come to worship and hold the Sabbath holy. I want to share with you, if I may, our author, Selwyn Hughes, has an entire section in his devotional on the rebuilding of the walls of Nehemiah, and I may just explore that for a while going forward through Advent, maybe as an Advent teaching here as we are moving into Advent, moving into Christmas, and I want us to just be ever cognizant of the different ways in which society and the rules and regulations and what's going on in our lives may be eroding just a little bit the walls of our church, the walls that define us as Christians. And so let me share with you, and this may make a little bit more sense to you. It's the last section in his section on rebuilding the walls, and as I read through these, this last section for me and for the application that I try to like to make with this became first. So let me read the last section that he has, and we'll use this as a springboard to move into the others. He says, having taken care of the primary cause of the spiritual decline in Jerusalem, compromise in the house of God, the walls were being deteriorated, not only the physical walls of the city, but it's what they represented in the holy city of Jerusalem. And the walls were being deteriorated, had been torn down, and their identity as Christians had been compromised. It says Nehemiah now sets about rectifying another major abuse, the desecration of the Sabbath. Church, let's just be honest and let's think about what's happened over at least my lifetime in how we have relegated the Sabbath not so much as a holy day, but just another day. Just another day. He says, as he makes his way around the city and the outlying areas, he sees Jews treading wine presses on the Sabbath, and others bringing sacks of grain and other produce to Jerusalem in readiness for the market the next day. In one instance, he sees men from Tyre actually holding an open market on Israel's holy day. Nehemiah once again goes straight to the heart of the issue and proceeds to challenge the leaders with these blunt and outspoken words. And we quote, "What is this wicked thing you are doing?" In verse 17, he says. In case the nobles responsible remain indifferent, Nehemiah steps in and commands the city gates to be closed before the Sabbath so that no merchandise can be brought into Jerusalem. What in the world would happen to us today if we protested and all the stuff that everybody's protesting on? And what would happen if the church protested the opening of businesses on Sunday? I remember the small hometown in which I was raised. I was in the shopping mall business, and there was a movement to do away with the blue laws. I remember growing up, Sunday was a holy day, and there was nothing open on Sunday. There was no commerce and no business except at the drugstore in case you needed medication, and that was all you could buy at the drugstore was your medicines. And so, how far have we come? How have we progressed, haven't we? We've been progressive, and we've progressed right into Sunday becoming not so much a holy day as just another day. Well, it upset Nehemiah. And then so he says, he goes on to say, on one or two occasions, the merchants and sellers spend a night outside Jerusalem and appear to have defiantly plied their trade there. Consequently, Nehemiah threatens them with imprisonment. And they appear to take seriously, for they refrain from doing so again. So anyway, and he goes on to say, Selwyn says, living as we do in a secular society, it is seemingly impossible to convince our leaders of the benefits of keeping the Sabbath. Well, most of our leaders don't give a flip about the Sabbath. Let's be honest. But we must keep on trying nevertheless. We get to do our part. What can we do on the Sabbath? How can we rebuild the walls of the institution of church and the Sabbath being a holy day? I'm guilty, you're guilty, we're all guilty of defaming the Sabbath because we've just allowed society and outside influences to change the way we live our lives as Christians. We're supposed to be the one influencing the world rather than the world influencing us. So at any rate, it says the moral decline we see is not due entirely to the desecration of the Sabbath, of course, but there is no doubt in my mind, Selwyn Hughes says, that it has something to do with it. As we said earlier, we either take God's commandments or take the consequences. Honor the Sabbath and keep it holy, God said. Church, this is not a word of condemnation, and please don't take it this way. But I have noticed that there are some among us who have taken the pandemic perhaps as an excuse not to fellowship with other believers on the Sabbath. You see, honoring the Sabbath is not just about staying home and watching a TV sermon while you're busy doing something else, or even while you're alone and paying close attention. The church is the people coming together and worshiping corporately. That's what's important to God. As we move into Thanksgiving and as we move into Christmas, I want us to concentrate, and we'll be talking about this some Sunday when we preach and teach from the lepers who came, 5 lepers, I believe it was, the 5 lepers who were healed by Jesus. We're entering into a defining moment, a defining time, some walls upon which define us as Christians, and that is gratitude, that is gratefulness. Excuse me, that's giving. Thanksgiving. We give thanks for the blessings we have because of what God has done with and for us through His Son, Jesus Christ, and by the power of the Holy Spirit. Anyway, just some musings from an old pastor with, well, I was going to say with nothing more to do, but I've got plenty to do. But I think about these things, and I like to share them with you. I just want to lead us and guide us into a state of a greater sense of awareness of the Sabbath and those walls that are not designed to keep people in or keep people out, but are designed to define us as who we are as Christians, and particularly the Sabbath. The Lord bless you and keep you until we meet again, and may His countenance rise up upon you and bring you peace, and may you be blessed and filled with all the goodness and all the love of God through His Son, Jesus Christ. And until we meet again, we'll be coming at you again on Sunday. We encourage you to be in church somewhere. Go somewhere where people are gathering. There's a space and a time of space of grace that God supernaturally, if you will, ministers to us in these disciplines of our faith, where we come together, where we sacrifice and we come together to worship God. And sometimes that worship is nothing more or less than just our coming together and being together and allowing God to minister to us. So until we meet again, we'll see you Sunday and ask God's blessings to be upon you until then. The Lord love you, and so do we.